In a kingdom far, far away from here, where swallows fly in the fall, there reigns a king with 11 sons and 1 daughter named Li De. Those 11 young men all wore crosses on their chests and swords by their sides. At school, they rode on golden boards with sharp diamond knives. They read well and knew the lessons very well. They truly deserve to be princes. The youngest sister, Li De, often sat on a glass chair, holding a book with many paintings in her hand. That book alone was worth half the country of any king. They lived very happily, but not for long. The king and number 39's father was a widower. He had an affair with a cruel queen. She did not love those poor children at all. From the first day, the children felt that way. That day, there was a festival at the castle and the children attended. But instead of the cakes and cooked apples that princes and princesses usually eat, the queen only gave them sand and told them that it was good enough for them. The next week, she sent someone to take her there. Lives in a farmer and number 39's family. In just a short time, she managed to make her father stop loving his children and not pay any attention to them anymore. That woman is a witch. One day, she said to the 11 princes, "You should get out of here, go around the world and search for food like full-fledged birds." But she could not harm them as she wished for them. Turned into a flock of splendid swans, flying over the royal garden and the nearby forest while making strange sounds. In the morning, the swans flew over the hut, where Princess Lydia was sleeping on the bed. Lovely bed. The swans circled the roof, stretching their necks and flapping their wings loudly, but no one saw or heard anything. The swans continued to fly, flying high above the clouds, farther and farther away. The whole flock flew towards the dark forest along the beach. Little Li De stayed in the thatched hut. There was no other game. She played with some green leaves. She poked a leaf with a needle and looked through the hole at the sun. She imagined seeing her brothers and number 39's bright eyes, and every time the sunlight shone on her cheeks, she thought it was her brothers and number 39's passionate kisses. The sad days passed one after another. When the wind blew through the rose bush in front of the house, the wind asked the rose, "Is there anyone else more beautiful than you?" The whole rose bush swayed and said, "Yes, there is Li De." Sunday, when the old farmer lady sitting reading prayers on the threshold, the wind came and opened the pages of the book and asked, "Is there anyone more pious than the book?" "Yes, there is Li De." The Book of Answers and Commissions also said that it was true. When she was 15 years old, Lizzie was returned to the king and number 39's palace. But when the queen saw that she had become so beautiful, she could not contain her anger. She wanted to turn her into a swan, but she did not dare, because the king wanted to meet the princess. Early the next morning, the queen entered the bathroom made entirely of marble, with soft mattresses and colorful carpets covering the entire room. She caught 3 toads, kissed them and told the first toad, "Toad, jump on Li and number 39's head when he goes to bathe, making him as stupid as a toad." Then she told the second toad, "Toad, please hang on its forehead, making it as ugly as a toad so that its father would no longer recognize it." Finally, she said to the third child, "Toad, please cling to its heart, give it bad thoughts so that it and those who others have to suffer." Having said that, she dropped 3 toads into the water, causing the water to immediately turn blue. She called Li De in, undressed her and forced her to bathe. As soon as Liz entered the water tank, the first toad clung to her hair, the second toad clung to her forehead and the third toad clung to her chest. It seemed that Liz didn't and #39 know anything, and when she stepped out in the water tank, 3 poppies flowed on the water. If the toads did not have venom and the witch did not hug and kiss them, they would have turned into 3 roses. However, they also turned into flowers because they clung to Lydia and number 39's head and heart. Because she was very pious and had a very pure soul, sorcery could not do anything to her. When the evil queen saw this, she took the sap of a walnut shell and rubbed it against Lydia and number 39's body, making her turn black. She also rubbed stinky ointment on her face and messed up her long, beautiful hair. The beautiful Li De could no longer be recognized. When the king saw her, he was terrified and declared that she was not his daughter. No one wanted to receive her, except the guard dog and the swallows, but they were just wretched animals, no one would listen even if they spoke. Poor Li De cried bitterly and thought of her brothers. She sadly escaped from the king and number 39's palace, wandered all day in the fields and finally came to a large forest. She doesn't and #39 know where she will go next. However, while she was depressed, she always wanted to find her brothers, who were now probably wandering around the world like her. She had just walked a few steps in the forest when it was about to get dark. She was lost and could no longer find her way. She lay down on the moss, finished praying, then rested her head on a tree root. Everything was silent. The air is calm. Around her, in the canopy of leaves, hundreds of fireflies sparkled like green flames. When she shook a tree branch, it looked like a shower of stars falling. All night long she dreamed of her brothers. She dreamed that she and her brothers were playing as children, writing on golden tablets with diamond-pointed knives and looking at a book of drawings worth half a country to any man. Which king? But on the board, they not only wrote zeros or underlined ancient lines, but also wrote their successes and everything they had seen or happened during their wandering lives. In the book, all the people and objects in the paintings move. Birds sing. He stepped out of the painting to talk to Lizzie and her brothers. Every time the viewer turns the page, the people and objects in the painting are not disturbed. When Liu woke up, the sun had risen above the horizon. She could not see the sun clearly, because the large trees spread their dense branches down to her head. But the rays of sunlight also penetrate the leaves and sparkle like golden flowers. The air is fragrant. The bird sang and flew to perch on the princess and number 39's shoulder. She heard the sound of gurgling water, flowing in streams and pouring into a lagoon, surrounded by green leaves. All around the lagoon were thick bushes, but there was a stretch where deer walked in unison so Lyde could follow it all the way to the edge of the lagoon. She looked down. The water is clear and each leaf is so clearly printed on the water and number 39's surface that, if the wind did not shake the trees, people would feel as if the branches and leaves were painted on the bottom of the pond. Suddenly seeing her reflection in the water, she was frightened. "Because your black face looks so ugly." She took the pretty dressing table and scooped water up her eyes and forehead, and her skin became white again. She took off her clothes and waded into the water. There has never been such a beautiful princess. After getting dressed, she took a sip of spring water, then went deep into the forest, not knowing where she was going. She remembered her brothers, the most merciful God. Surely he will never abandon her. He gave birth to wild apple trees for the hungry, and she trembled to find a tree laden with fruit. She stopped to eat an apple and then set off again. The scene was so silent that she could hear her footsteps and the rustle of leaves under her feet. There was not a single bird in sight. Not a single ray of light penetrated through the thick branches of the tree. Looking from a distance, tall trees grew close together, like an iron fence. Li Di had never seen such a quiet scene. When night came, she became even more worried. There was not a single firefly in the moss. She hid in a place to sleep. She dreamed that the canopy of leaves parted and God was looking at her. Lovely fairies were flying above her head. The next morning, when she woke up, she no longer knew whether she was dreaming or witnessing a real scene. She set off again. After a few minutes of walking, she met an old woman carrying a basket full of plums. She gave Liz a few fruits. She asked her if she had seen 11 princes passing through the forest. No, the old woman replied, but yesterday I saw 11 swans, each wearing a crown. Made of gold, she stopped and swam in a nearby stream. She took Lydia to a stream bank. Long leafy tree branches on both sides of the stream intersect to form a cradle on the water. Lydia said goodbye to the old woman and walked along the stream until it reached the point where it flowed into the ocean. Before her eyes was a vast, blue sea, without a sail or a shadow of a boat. "How can we go further now?" She looked at the pebbles on the shore of the lake. Countless, the sea water had rounded them. Glass, iron, stone, all the objects that drifted there were polished smooth by the water, as smooth as a princess and number 39's hand. The ocean, she thought to herself, pushed everything to roll endlessly and finally become smooth. I also want to never get tired. Clear wave. We understand what the waves want to teach us. One day we will definitely find them. She saw 11 swan feathers among the seaweed. She picked it up and put it into a bundle. Many drops of water sparkled on the feathers. Is it sea water or tears? She stood alone on the beach, but didn't and #39 pay attention to that. She was engrossed in watching the constantly changing scene of the sea. When a dark cloud flew in, the sea seemed to want to tell her, "Watch out, I and number 39 am about to get angry." When the wind picked up, the ocean waves foamed up. When the red clouds darken and the wind calms down, the sea looks like a block of pink marble. The sea water is sometimes blue, sometimes white, but no matter how calm the sea is, there is always the sound of water gently lapping on the shore. The water gently rose and fell like the chest of a sleeping child. When the sun set, Lydia saw 11 large swans with white feathers, golden crowns on their heads, appearing on the horizon. Fly towards the mainland. They flew one after another to form a long white strip. She ran to a high bank and hid behind a bush. The swans swooped down near her and flapped their wide, white wings. As the sun had just set, suddenly all the feathers fell off and Lizda saw 11 beautiful princes, her brothers. She shouted loudly. Even though they had changed a lot, she immediately felt that they were her brothers. She ran to hug them and loudly called each of them by name. When they recognized their youngest sister, now older and more beautiful than before, They were overjoyed. They both laughed and cried and recounted the cruelty of their stepmother. The eldest prince said, "You are forced to fly all day long, only turning back into humans when the sun sets, so you have to fly close to the land near dusk. If you were still flying high at that time, you would fall to the ground. This is not where you live, you are across the sea in a country as beautiful as this one. The road to that place is very far, you have to cross the ocean and halfway there is no island where you can sleep. In the middle of the ocean there was only one rock where the men could squeeze together and rest. When the tide came, the water rose up to where they parked, but they were still grateful to God for placing a rock there so they could have a place to rest for the night when they turned back into humans. Without that rock, you cannot return to your fatherland, because to cross the ocean, you have to fly for 2 days every year, the 2 longest days in a year. Once a year you are allowed to come here and stay for 11 days. At that time, you were flying over the big forest. You looked at the castle where our birth was born and where our father lived, looked at the towering church steeple. Nearby was where our beloved mother was. We are at rest. Here the trees and bushes are charcoal burners singing the old songs that made us dance when we were children. It seems like there and number 39 is something that attracts you to this place, and you finally found me, your little sister. You still stay here for 2 days, then have to cross the sea to return to that beautiful, strange country. Or you guys can take me too. But you guys Don and number 39 have any ships, what can you do? Is there anything I can do to save you guys? Miss Lydia asks. And they talked almost all night. They only slept for a moment. Suddenly, there was the sound of bird wings flapping above her head, waking Lizzie up. Those were 11 princes who turned into swans and circled above her head. They flew up, higher and higher, then flew far away. But one prince, the youngest son, stayed alone with his sister. He snuggled his head into her lap, and she caressed his swan feathers. They were together all day. In the afternoon the other brothers flew back, and when the sun set, they became human again. The eldest brother said, "Tomorrow you have to leave and return here in a year." "But you can, and number 39 leave me here. Do you have the courage to follow me? Your arms once carried me through the forest, the wings of all of you put together, Aaron and 39 they strong enough to carry me to the other side of the sea?" The youngest girl said, "Yes, you guys take me with you." At night they braided a strong net from rushes and willow strings. Lydia slept on that net and, as soon as the sun appeared, her brothers turned into swans, used their beaks to pull the net up into the clouds, carrying their sister who was sleeping very peacefully. Sunlight shined into her eyes. A swan quickly flew above, using its wide wings to cover her. While she slept. When Liz woke up, they had flown far away from the mainland. Flying high above the sea like that, she felt like she was living a magical dream. Next to her was a tree branch with fruit and a bunch of edible roots. It was the youngest prince who took care of that for her. She smiled as if to thank him. She recognized him very well. It was the youngest prince who had been flying above the sun net. They were flying so high now that the first ship they saw looked like an albatross on the water. Behind them there was a large cloud like a mountain. She saw her and the princes and number 39 silhouettes reflected in the cloud. Never before had she seen such a beautiful scene. But the higher the sun rose and the farther the clouds went, the shadows also disappeared. They flew all day without stopping, like an arrow whistling in space. But they flew a little slower than usual because they still had to carry their younger sister. The weather suddenly worsened and it was almost dark. Liz was worried when he saw the sun sinking into the horizon without seeing any rocks rising above the sea surface. She felt the swans flapping their wings stronger. "Oh my God," she thought to herself, "if they dawn and number 39, get there in time. It and number 39's our fault. When the sun sets, you will turn into a human and fall into the sea and drown." From the bottom of her heart, she prayed to God for help. But they still hadn't and #39 seen the rock. Dark clouds were gathering and the wind was blowing strongly, signaling a storm. The clouds gathered into a leaden gray mass. Lightning flashed continuously. The sun had reached the sea surface. Miss Lydia felt her heart broken. At one point, the swans swooped down so fast that she thought she was falling into the sea. But no, the swans were already gliding up. The sun sank halfway into the water and she immediately saw the island below. It looked no bigger than a seal poking its head above the water. The sun was setting quickly, leaving only a thin strip of light on the horizon as she set foot on the rock. Then the sunlight disappeared like a piece of burned paper. 11 princes and Lydia were crowded together on the rock, with just enough room for them to set their feet. The ocean waves were high, over their heads. The sky flashed brightly like it was on fire and thunder boomed endlessly. But the 12 brothers held hands and sang prayers to strengthen their hearts. In the morning, the air was clean and cool. As soon as the sun rose, the swans flew away with Lizzie. The sea is still rough. Looking down from above at the dark blue, foamy waves, they felt like millions of swans were fluttering on the water and number 39's surface. When the sun rose even higher, Lydia looked ahead and saw in space a strip of land. It and number 39's all mountains with sparkling ice. She saw a great castle surrounded by stacked columns. Behind is an oak forest and many flower gardens. Lydia asked them if that was where they were going, but the swans shook their heads. The scene she saw was the magnificent castle, the ever-changing shape of the Fairy Morgan. No one can get in there. Lydia was engrossed in admiring that wonderful landscape, when suddenly the mountains, castles, and trees all disappeared, and in their place were 20 majestic, identical churches, each with a tall tower. And the magnificent steeple. Lydia thought she heard the sound of an organ, but it was only the whisper of the sea. She was flying close to the churches, when suddenly those structures turned into a fleet of great boats with sails, surfing very quickly and then disappearing. Magical scenes like that appeared throughout the journey until they saw them. The strip of land they were planning to fly to. There stood towering blue mountains with forests full of cedar trees, castles and many cities. Long before sunset, Lydia was placed on a rock, right at the entrance of a cave, the ground covered with vines like a beautiful carpet. "What do you wish to dream about tonight?" the youngest prince asked while showing his sister her bedroom. "I pray to God to let me dream of the liberation for you guys," Liz replied. That thought never left her. She asked God to help her. When she fell asleep, she still prayed. She dreamed that she was flying through space again, arriving at Fairy Morgan and number 39's castle, and she approached her, gorgeous and beautiful, just like the fairy who gave her plums and told the story of the swans wearing crowns. "Crown her when she goes to the forest." "Your brothers can be freed," said the fairy, "but do you have enough courage and perseverance to save your brothers? Water is softer than your delicate hands, but flowing water wears away even the hardest stone. The thing is that the water one and number 39's feel the pain your hands will have to endure. Water dozen and #39's have a heart, so it dozen and #39's no pain like you do. You will encounter many dangers. Do you see the nettle branch I hold in my hand? Around the cave where I was sleeping, nettles grew a lot. But only this nettle and the nettle that grows in cemeteries can be used. Dawn and number 39's forget that. I have to go pick that tree and my hand will swell and it will be extremely painful. Tear down the tree with your foot and you will get a hemp fiber that you will use to weave 11 long-sleeved shirts. After weaving, I put the cloak on the 11 swans, and thus the evil magic will disappear. But you must remember that from the moment you start weaving until you finish weaving, you must not say a single word. No matter how many years you have to weave, you cannot say anything. If you say just one word, that voice will be like a knife piercing your brothers and number 39's hearts. So the lives of your brothers hang on the tip of your tongue. The fairy placed the nettle branch in Lysine and #39's hand, and her hand felt as if it had been burned. She woke up. The sky was bright, and beside her was the nettle branch she had dreamed about. She knelt down to thank God and left the cave, starting to work to save her brothers. She eagerly broke the nettle, her hands burning. Soon her arms were swollen. But she calmly endured the pain, as long as she freed her brothers. She trampled the nettles with her bare feet and began weaving dark blue shirts. When the sun began to set, her brothers returned. They were very scared when they saw that she was mute. At first they thought it was a new magic spell from the evil stepmother, but when they saw their sister and number 39's hands, they immediately understood that she was working for them. The youngest brother burst into tears, tears falling down, immediately disappearing the blisters on his skin, and Lydia no longer felt any pain. She stayed up all night weaving clothes. She did not want to rest before freeing her children. Her brother. The whole next day she sat alone while the swans flew away, but she no longer felt the day was long. She finished weaving one shirt and began weaving the second. Suddenly there was the sound of a hunter and number 39's horn. Up into the mountain. The closer the horn sounded, the more scared she became. She suddenly heard a dog barking. She panicked and hid in the wilderness. She wrapped the woven garment into a bundle and sat on it. Suddenly a big dog ran up, followed by a group of hunting dogs. A moment later, all the hunters gathered at the cave entrance. This is a hunting trip for the king who rules this land. The king walked straight towards Lizda. Never before had he seen such a beautiful young woman. He asked her, "How did you come to this place, oh beautiful girl?" Lydia just shook her head, because she needed to keep her mouth shut to save her brothers and number 39's lives. At the same time, she hid her hands under her shirt so that the king could not see her bulging hands. "Please follow me," the king said. "You cannot stay here." If you are both beautiful and beautiful, you will wear clothes made entirely of silk and velvet, and I will give you a golden crown. She will stay in the palace." Then the king put her on the saddle. She clasped her hands together and cried, but the king softly told her, "I Don and number 39. Want to harm you. One day you will thank me." Having said that, the king hugged her and sat in front of him, riding his horse over the mountain. All the hunting group followed. At dusk they returned to the capital. The king brought Liu to the palace. In the large marble rooms, there were magical water fountains, and the walls were full of portraits. But she didn't and #39 pay attention to anything. She just whined and cried. She absent-mindedly let the maids dress her in splendid clothes, attach pearls to her hair, and put gloves on her scorched hands. Dressed like that, she was even more beautiful, to the point that the whole court bowed before her beauty. Even though the priest shook his head in protest and asserted that this forest girl must be a witch, whose eyes burned and turned the king and number 39's heart crazy, he still declared her to be his betrothed. A congress was held. The most beautiful girls in the country danced the most beautiful dances. But in Liz and number 39's eyes and lips, there was not a single smile and only pain and sadness. The king opened an entire bedroom for her. The room was covered with a very precious blue carpet, looking exactly like the scene of the cave in which the king had met her. On the floor was the bundle of nettles she had used to weave her shirt, and on the ceiling hung the finished shirt. One person in the hunting group found it strange and brought those things back. The king said, "Staying like this, you will be able to imagine being in your old place. There are also things I cherish or often used before. With these things, in the midst of luxury, I can still live with the imagination of my old life." When Lydia saw the things her heart earnestly desired to see, her lips smiled and her skin, his face, became rosy and bright again. She thought of her brothers and number 39's lives and bent down to kiss the king and number 39's hand. He hugged her to his chest and ordered the church bell to ring repeatedly to announce his wedding. So the mute girl became the queen. The priest whispered countless obscene words into the king and number 39's ear, but those words could not shake the king and number 39's intention, and the wedding ceremony continued. The patriarch had to personally place the crown on Lizda and #39's head. He was cruel and pressed his crown down on her forehead, giving her a headache. But she remained inert, no longer feeling physical pain. Her heart hurt even more because she had not been able to free her brothers. She remained mute, because just one word could kill her brothers. She could only use her eyes to express her gratitude to the benevolent king for trying his best to comfort her. Every day she loved the king more and more, and in her heart she also wanted to convey her suffering to the king, but she could not say it. Every night she went back into the lovely room, decorated just like an old cave, and continued weaving one shirt after another. By the 7th weave, all the nettle fibers are gone. She knew that nettles only grew in cemeteries and she had to go pick them herself. How could I get to the cemetery now? She thought to herself, oh, no matter how much my hand hurts, it cannot compare to the pain that weighs heavily on my heart. I want to sacrifice everything for you guys. God will bless me. Trembling as if she were doing something evil, one moonlit night, she went down to the garden, followed the main road, through the deserted streets to near the cemetery. There she saw the old and disgusting witches sitting in a circle on the largest grave. They threw away all their clothes as if they were about to take a bath and used their long, thin fingers to dig up new graves. Lydia had to pass by them and they stared at her. But she still recited the prayer. She picked some nettles, then returned to the king and number 39's palace. Only one person saw her go to the cemetery. That and number 39's, the old priest. While everyone was sleeping, only he was awake. He thought he had guessed correctly about the Queen and number 39's suspicious behavior. According to him, the Queen herself was a witch who had bewitched the king and all his subjects. The next day, he told the king what happened the night before. But while he was telling the story, the statues around him all shook their heads as if to say, "And quat. Miss Lydia is innocent. And quat." The old priest distorted the meaning of those headshakes and said that the statues were condemning the Queen. So 2 tears rolled down the king and number 39's cheeks and he returned to the palace, carrying a terrible doubt in his heart. The next night, he pretended to sleep and saw Lysine go out like that, and every time the king followed her until she returned to the palace. As the day passed, the king became more and more taciturn, and Lysine also followed her. Do not know why. That was another sadness for her, but her biggest worry was still the liberation of her brothers. Her tears poured down on the royal brocade mattress and velvet blanket like sparkling diamonds, but everyone who saw her was still jealous of her beauty. Her work was almost finished. She only had one more shirt to weave, but the nettle thread was gone. She had to go out again to pick a few handfuls. Thinking about traveling at night and those horrible witches made her shudder, but her will was unshakable and she also had great faith in God. She went to the cemetery again. The king and the priest followed her. They saw her enter the cemetery door and then disappear. When they got closer, they saw the witches sitting on a grave. The king ran back. He imagined that among those witches there was a person whom he placed his head on his chest at night. The people will judge him, so he ruled. The people condemned the Queen to death and burning. From the glorious room, she was taken to a closed prison, the wind whistling through the iron window bars. Instead of silk and velvet, people gave her a bunch of nettles that she had picked, to rest her head on. Rough clothes, still full of thorns, woven from nettle fibers, were spread as beds. The thorns stabbed into her body and burned, but she enjoyed it. She immediately got to work and thanked God. In the street, children sang songs cursing her. No one comforted her at all. In the afternoon, a swan flew to the window and landed on the window. It was the youngest prince who found her whereabouts. She felt extremely happy, even though she knew that tomorrow would be the last night of her life. Her work was almost finished and her brothers were not far from her. The priest came to baptize her. The king ordered him to do so. Lydia shook her head and signaled him to leave her alone. That very night she had to complete her work. Otherwise all the grief, tears and sleepless nights would be in vain. The cardinal grumbled as he left, but she knew she was innocent. The mice scurried across the floor and untangled the nettles for her. A nightingale perched on the window and sang all night to encourage her. Before sunrise, 11 of her brother and number 39's princes entered the palace and asked to see the king. They were told that it was impossible, because it was not yet dawn and it was impossible to wake the king up now. The princes were tired of begging and threatening. The forbidden army arrived, and the king himself came out and asked why there was such a fuss. Just then the sun rose, the princes were no longer there, people only saw 11 swans wearing golden crowns flying above the royal palace. People flocked to the outside of the city gate to watch the witch and number 39's burning. He forced Lizzie to wear a coarse cloth shirt. Her long hair fell over her beautiful face, her cheeks were as pale as the skin of a dead person, her lips seemed to pray while her hands continued to sew. Right on the way to her death, she still didn't and #39 stopped sewing because she had finished weaving and sewing 10 shirts, and only had the 11th one left, so she tried her best to finish it before she was burned to death. Look, look! There and number 39's a witch. Look what he and number 39's mumbling in his mouth. He didn't and #39 have a single Bible in his hand. I have to tear into pieces that damn bundle that and number 39's hanging next to me. Everyone pushed each other and was about to grab the bundle, when suddenly 11 swans flew in. They perched around her and flapped their long, wide wings. The crowd was surprised and stepped back. That and number 39's a sign from heaven. She must be innocent, many people whispered. The executioner grabbed Lee and number 39's hand. She quickly threw 11 clothes onto the swans, and they immediately turned into 11 young princes. As for the youngest prince, he had a swan wing instead of an arm, because a shirt had not yet been sewn, and one arm was missing. Now I can say it. Lydia shouted, I am innocent. Seeing this, the people quickly knelt down before her as before a female saint. But she fell down, fainted in her brother's and number 39's arms, because of working so much, worrying so much and being in so much pain, she was exhausted. That and number 39's right, our sister is innocent. The prince declared. And the prince told the story. While the prince told the story, a scent emanated as if there were millions of roses somewhere. Those are the sticks of firewood on the funeral pyre that have taken root and grown into flowers and leaves. At this time, the funeral pyre has turned into a cluster of roses. At the top is a white rose, sparkling like a star. The king picked the flower and put it on Lysine and #39's chest. She woke up, filled with joy and happiness. Suddenly, all the church bells that no one had rung rang. Birds flocked in flocks, and in the king and number 39's palace opened a great festival, unprecedented ever. Thank you for joining us for today's fairy tale. We hope these stories bring joy and meaning to your day. If you love our channel, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any exciting tales. Wishing you a good night and sweet dreams. See you in the next story.